Is there more information about the birth of Jesus that is not contained in the Bible? What was the mysterious light in the sky on the first Christmas? Where did the Holy Family go to escape the death warrant of King Herod? Are there special places where people are still touched by the incredible power of the Holy Family? Tonight, we will uncover the miracle of the first Christmas.
During Jesus' time, Palestine was a very different place than it is today. People lived simply, and conditions were difficult. It was part of the Roman Empire, and the people were subject to its harsh rule. But people were also religious. They believed in God and the power of miracles to change their lives. They were ready for a Messiah to come and liberate them. Ancient Jewish prophecies told that a child would be born in Bethlehem, and that child would be their king. The planets aligned in the sky, telling a group of wise men in the east that the time for the birth had come. It was then that a young peasant girl from Galilee received the news that she would bear this special child. Forced to travel for a census, Mary gave birth in a grotto in Bethlehem. When the Magi told King Herod the news that a new king had been born, he tried to have the infant Jesus killed. But with a warning from an angel, the Holy Family fled from Bethlehem to the safety of Egypt. Soon after his birth, Jesus began to perform miracles that touched the lives of the people around him. The power of these events and his influence is remembered by generations of people living in the Holy Land, and it is recorded in ancient texts that survive to this day. Modern astronomers have calculated the positions of the planets 2,000 years ago, concluding that it must have been the conjunction of the planets Venus and Jupiter that formed the bright star that the wise men saw in the night sky. We know that these wise men, or Magi, found the infant Jesus in Bethlehem and gave him gifts. But that is all that was known about them until modern archaeologists unearthed evidence proving that these were real men living in Persia. On a dig in Iran, a German archaeologist found coins minted in the kingdom of Harawatia by a king named Gaspar. The name and the location fit perfectly with the story told in the Bible. An American archaeologist picked up the trail. His journey took him to Iran, where he unearthed the foundations of Gaspar's castle, finally proving his existence after 2,000 years.
Two great archaeological finds of the 20th century occurred just after the end of the Second World War. Could it be that the discoveries of the Gnostic Gospels and the Dead Sea Scrolls resurfaced in order to help heal the devastating wounds of that war?
Well, as we know, it was a brutal fight to put down the Nazis in Germany. Soldiers were killed, millions. Many lives were lost. Whole cities were reduced to rubble. And for the Jews in particular, it was a difficult time. They were a displaced people. The Nazis had ravaged them. You have to understand that whole families were torn apart by the Holocaust. The orphans, the stragglers, the survivors were left to somehow make sense of what had happened to them. The effect of this violence and hatred left a hole that must have seemed impossible to fill. Well, miraculously, really, two discoveries were made right at that same time in the deserts of Egypt and Israel. Discoveries which recalled another Jewish man who had taught peace and love, Jesus of Nazareth. They were the Gnostic Gospels and the Dead Sea Scrolls, both religious texts dating from the time of Jesus. The first, the Gnostic Gospels, was written by Christians and gives us some insight into what the first Christian church must have been like. The second, the Dead Sea Scrolls, was written by Jews who were living in the time of Jesus and gives us an insight into what his life must have been like. These were extraordinary finds that offered an old tradition of peace, a tradition that had been sent to earth by God and forged in the Jewish homeland over 2,000 years ago. This was the first time in history that the Jews, scattered Jews, were able to return home to the newly formed state of Israel. After all this destruction, it must have been an unbelievable chance for rebirth. But ironically, this new hope was marred by another war between the Arabs and the Israelis, the ancient war over ownership of the new Jewish state of Israel. Well, here's Israel, the new state surrounded on every side by Arab nations, and it's suddenly forced to defend itself, to fight for its very life on the exact day that it declares its independence. Well, the dust clears, and miraculously, against all odds, Israel still stands. And this sense of new hope remained alive. You have to marvel at the coincidence that the Gnostic Gospels, the Dead Sea Scrolls, both had been buried for 2,000 years, should be discovered within months of each other, and on the eve of the birth of Israel. One wonders if that could just be a coincidence, or if perhaps it's another sort of miracle. Well, after the dust settled, scholars finally had a chance to take a look at these new texts and astonishingly realized that we had discovered ancient writings on Jesus.
It's often not realized that Alexander the Great, who was active about 300 before the Common Era, 300 years before Jesus is born, Alexander the Great plays a major role in the spread of Christianity. First of all, by conquering the virtually entire known world at that time, Alexander the Great spread Greek culture and, most importantly, the Greek language throughout all of these areas. And that is the language in which the Christian Gospels seem to have been originally written. In the beginning, Christianity was somewhat anarchic. That is, it did not have a rigid system of organization. The earliest Christians, immediately after the death of Jesus, viewed themselves as simply an extension of Judaism. In that sense, they had already differentiated themselves from the ancient cults associated with fertility, perhaps worship of astrological bodies such as the moon, the sun, the stars. The Judaic Christians were interested only in converting other Jews to Christianity. Shortly after the arrival of Christianity on the scene in Judaism, a person named Saul converts to Christianity and he becomes known as Paul, St. Paul. His vision of Christianity is somewhat different than that of James and the earliest Christians in Jerusalem. He receives the message, the understanding that all human beings, regardless of their racial or religious background, can become Christians. Paul is preaching his version of the gospel and converting people to his brand of Gentile Christianity, to Greek Christianity, and this, of course, without the hindrances or the impediments of mandatory circumcision, kosher dietary regulations, and the other things that would have seemed strange to a pagan. Without those things, Gentile Christianity flourished and was successful and became the dominant form of Christianity that, of course, we know today. One of the great problems in early Christianity was to reconcile the varying theologies that had developed in these various camps of Christianity. This, of course, led to a relatively anarchic setup within Christianity. If the Holy Spirit is giving revelations to anybody and everybody, then it's very difficult to have a common belief and a common creed to which you are going to subscribe. The Emperor Constantine, wanting peace within his empire and wanting these Christian groups to quit squabbling over theology, convenes the Council of Nicaea in 325. And Constantine himself appears to have chaired the council and entered into the debates. In some ways, the Council of Nicaea can be regarded as one of the key points in the founding of Christianity as it will continue through the centuries on into the Middle Ages and to the modern period. Many people don't realize that the creation of the New Testament was a very long and painful process. The New Testament, the 27 books that Christians now consider to be authoritative, did not simply fall out of the heavens at some early point in Christianity.
Of course, the process of how the New Testament came to be the way we have it today is a controversial and vexed issue. We believe now that there was already, within 20 or 30 years of the time of Jesus, a circulation of some of the sayings of Jesus written down. As people realized, hey, wait a minute, we're not going to have these people around much longer. We're not going to be able to just sit down and say, now, Peter, what did Jesus say when you asked him? But as that generation begins to pass, the later followers begin to realize, hey, we've got to write some of this stuff down so that we can use it and teach from it and share with other believers. So that led to the initial writing of these documents.
It's always fascinating to look at how the New Testament is put together, because as the Gnostic Gospels and the Dead Sea Scrolls prove, there were many important ancient writings that never made it into the Bible at all.
What's fascinating is that there are sources on Jesus outside of the biblical documents. I think most people don't know that. The apocryphal Gospels were responses to the original four Gospels. They tried to fill in the gaps in the gospel records, the childhood stories of Jesus that are not reported. We have other stories, the history of Joseph the carpenter, which explains what they made in the carpenter shop. We have the Arabic Gospel of the Infancy, which talks about these wonderful stories about the palm tree on the way to Egypt. We have a lot of these accounts that retell the biblical episodes, but add all kinds of detail.
Well, some of them, like the Gospel of Thomas, the Infancy Gospel of Thomas, was probably formulated in Gnostic circumstances because there are tendencies in the way the story is told to stress Jesus' wisdom. The same thing is true of most of those infancy and extraneous Gospels, we can call them that, or apocryphal Gospels, that aren't in the mainstream, that weren't accepted as biblical. The history of the Gnostics is very interesting. Even as early as the 2nd century, that movement was a very strong movement. The Gnostic type of Christianity was the dominant type of Christianity.
Gnosticism comes from the term gnosis, to know, that is knowledge. And it was a sect, it was a philosophy that believed that there was a kind of secret knowledge that people should learn in order to fully understand what life was about, in order to understand what God was like.
They produced literature. There's a large amount of literature. In fact, the Gospels and the other Gnostic writings that recently were found are included in a book which is even longer than the New Testament itself. But then the official church eventually saw this as kind of an eccentric form of religion, off the beam, and took measures to suppress it. What happened to these Gospels and why were they eliminated? Well, at one point, actually, the bishops of Rome condemned them and said they weren't to be used anymore. Then the bishops of Rome, the popes, started to try to eliminate the use of these other materials, which were considered to be not just irrelevant, but also harmful and damaging. One of the people there saw that the writing was on the wall for this Gnostic literature and put it all together and hid it at the face of a cliff.
How the Gnostic Gospels were brought back to life is as mysterious as the Gnostic sect itself.
The discovery of the Gnostic Gospels is an incredible story. It occurred in December of 1945 in Egypt along the Upper Nile River, about 300 miles to the south of Cairo. There was a group of camel drivers who were looking for fertilizer along the banks of the Nile. And one of the camel drivers happened upon an earthenware jar.
Ali! Ali, come quickly! What's going on?
His brother, who was the leader of the group, whose name happened to be Muhammad Ali, took the jar and thought at first that it might contain a genie, an evil spirit that would haunt him if he opened it. Then he thought that it might also contain gold. And finally, his greed overcame his fear.
Give me a shovel!
And for a few moments, he thought that he had discovered gold because the air was filled with tiny pieces of this yellow substance. And he very quickly realized that rather than gold, they were tiny pieces of papyrus.
When Ali unraveled the leather pouches, they contained old papyrus text.
Take one, please!
The men left discouraged. Ali begged the others to take some of the papers, but they refused.
Take some! Take some! Take one!
Ali gathered the contents of the pot, thinking that he might be able to use or perhaps sell the leather. He didn't realize that the papyrus papers he had found were Gnostic writings, long thought lost.
They were, in fact, priceless manuscripts, and that would constitute one of the most important archaeological finds of the 20th century.
It took no time before he was approached by an antique dealer.
Where is it?
Right here.
What happened was that word started to leak out among the antiquities dealers in Cairo.
You have to give me a good price.
You should take 500.
No, 500, no.
Ali thought that he was driving a hard bargain.
600? Okay, I'll take 600.
His fear of unleashing a curse would not be unfounded. Ali had no idea that the manuscripts he had found would set off a series of events that would affect the lives of those who touched them.
I have something here you'd be interested in.
Archaeologist Jean Dorès received an anonymous tip about the papers that sent him off to Cairo. Dorès was a well-known expert studying ancient Coptic texts. Upon his arrival in Cairo, Dorès received another message, this one from his old friend Togo Mina, head of the Coptic Museum.
Mina, Dorès, my friend.
One of the first people who found out about Muhammad Ali's discovery was Togo Mina, who was the director of the Coptic Museum in Cairo.
Mina showed Dorès a page of the Gnostic writings he had just purchased from a Belgian antique dealer, Albert Eid. These writings were long thought to be more fabrication than reality. Dorès wanted to see if there were any more pages in circulation.
I'll take you there.
While Dorès and Mina headed off to Alfred Eid's, the black market was doing a brisk business in manuscript sales. The black marketeer who purchased the entire collection paid antique dealer Maria Dattari a visit. It took her no time to realize the value of the papyrus texts and bought what she could afford.
How much do you want for them?
20.
No. That's too much.
15 will get you 2.
I'll take 2.
I'll be back. I'm sure you'll be wanting the others.
Hyde was not surprised by his visitor's interest in the texts, but would not reveal where he obtained the manuscripts.
Where did you get this?
I have my connections.
How much for this one?
The government cannot afford this.
Don't take this out of the country.
At the time, the Egyptian government had a nasty habit of confiscating antique, valuable items without compensating the owner. So if you found something, if you wanted to sell it, it had to be done on the black market.
Dorés was determined to find the source of the texts. As a scholar, he wanted to keep the writings together. But he faced a wall of silence from the antique dealers in the street. With funding low, Dorés returned to Paris with little hope of finding the entire collection of the Coptic manuscripts. While he was in Paris, Dorés received a package from Maria de Tari. She sent a sample of the pages she had in her possession. Dorés realized that these texts were part of the Gnostic Gospels. Dorés was on the next flight to Cairo.
My God.
When he arrived at Maria de Tari's office, he went straight to the manuscripts.
How did you... Where did you get these?
He wanted to be sure that they were the same pages he had begun to translate.
This is fantastic.
Dorés was reading the last Gospel of Thomas that contained the secret words of Jesus. He found the passage he was looking for.
Do you know what this means?
That's enough. I have my price.
But before Dorés could tell Maria about the curse, bombs fell. Egypt was at war. Mina and Dorés were hard at work securing funds for the manuscripts, but the war created chaos in the antique world. Word arrived that Maria and Albert were leaving the country with the manuscripts. Dorés rushed to the antique market to intercept Hyde and de Tari before they left the country. He was in a race against time. If he didn't stop them, the text could be lost forever. It seemed like Dorés was always 2 steps behind the antique dealers and the manuscripts. Dorés' worst fears were realized. He was too late. Both dealers were well on their way. But it seemed like the curse of the Gnostic Gospels began to take effect. Maria de Tari was arrested by the Egyptian government, her manuscripts confiscated. Albert Hyde fled with the manuscripts back to Belgium. Togomina died mysteriously of unknown causes. His quest for the Gnostic Gospels was his undoing. Albert Hyde was later found dead in a hotel room.
Dorés went back to Paris and had not really been able to obtain the manuscripts, but since he was only a graduate student, the other people at the university seized control of the project and never really credited him for it.
The only one who gained anything was the Egyptian government, who confiscated the documents and locked them away in a vault. No one knows if the misfortune that fell upon everyone who encountered the Gnostic Gospels was the curse or merely unfortunate circumstance. The manuscripts lay in a government vault for more than 20 years until James Robinson, an American scholar, translated them.
The translation of the Gnostic Gospels really came about in the 1960s. A man named James Robinson, who currently teaches at a university in Southern California, went out to Cairo and began to pester the Coptic Museum to let him see the manuscripts. So he had them over a weekend. He spent the 3 days in a dingy hotel room transcribing these manuscripts.
And now that's kind of exciting because there are some new sayings included in that collection, things that we don't have Jesus saying in the four Gospels. For example, saying number 34, I think, Jesus says, "Whoever is near me is near the fire, and whoever is far from me is far from the kingdom of God." Jesus could have said something like that. It's a tough saying.
The Gnostic Gospels were a very important discovery, but incredibly, that same year, there was another major discovery made, the Dead Sea Scrolls.
And of course, the same year, in 1947, a Bedouin shepherd boy was looking for a lost sheep of his, or goat, and he thought that the goat might have fallen into a pit, a cave, and he threw a rock down to rouse the goat, and he heard the cracking of ceramics. And inside, indeed, they found they had broken a great vase, a great jar in which the famous Dead Sea Scrolls, one of the famous Dead Sea Scrolls, was contained. And so this, of course, was a tremendous discovery because suddenly we have a library at the time of Jesus of Nazareth, which had not been ever even close to have been discovered before. Now we can compare how Hebrew scriptures were transcribed across 13.5 centuries. The thrilling fact is that it's 99.9% accuracy across all those years. And there are a lot of other reasons why the Dead Sea Scrolls are important, but I think that's the most interesting one.
In Egypt, the focus of attention for most visitors is the awe-inspiring antiquities, ancient wonders from the past. But our journey to Egypt centers on places the Holy Family visited on their journey to safety. The Holy Family fled Palestine from Bethlehem, bypassing Jerusalem because of Herod's edict. They headed west across the brutal, arid conditions of the Sinai. In fear of Herod's army, they often traveled alone on lesser-known routes.
Another surprising thing that happened in the flight to Egypt, according to these early apocryphal Gospels, is that the Holy Family was set upon by a squad of robbers who couldn't steal anything from them because they were so poor. And so these gentlemanly thieves opened up their brown bag lunches and shared lunch with the Holy Family. And Jesus would see one of those nice thieves 30 years later at a place called Calvary. You guessed it, the thief crucified on his right. The good thief, remember the account.
The thieves weren't the only problem that the Holy Family encountered. It was also they had to cross this giant desert, the Sinai Desert, between Palestine and Egypt. This was a journey that would not be very difficult today. But they were on foot and on the backs of animals, and they were probably traveling 10, 20 miles a day. The desert was hot, sapping their strength and making them thirst for water. And there must have been very little relief. The journey was long, and the distances between watering holes was great. Well, after making their way over this hot sands of Egypt for all this time, they come to the Nile River Valley, where there's abundant water and lush greenery. You can imagine what a welcome sight that must have been after all that traveling to finally be able to drink. They'd arrived at last and were safe from Herod.
After replenishing their strength and supplies, they traveled south. But the severe desert conditions forced them to rest in Wadi Natrun. Their visit made this land sacred. As a result of their stay, a large concentration of monasteries grew in the early days of Christianity. Today, only 4 survive. At Anbar Bishoy Monastery, Father Tadros explains the power of the area.
The importance of this monastery comes from the point that the Holy Family visited this area during the flight to Egypt. And this became a holy place. That's why all the people all over the world come to visit this area. And since the people know that it is a holy place, they visit it from time to time. When they get a problem, when they get ill, they pray. And when they came back, they found that their problems were completely solved and they became healthy. That's why they cling too much to this area.
The miraculous power of the first Christmas endures to this day in this sacred place. Countless numbers of stories speak of the miraculous power that has endured for over 2,000 years. In the shadow of the monastery in Wadi Natrun, General Harper experienced a strange phenomenon.
I was fighting a losing battle.
How much ammunition do we have left? Not much. I figure we got enough to last us a couple hours. We gotta make these count.
I took responsibility for the men under my command. Those boys were like sons to me.
General, I've got them on the phone. What's the situation? We're losing men left and right. What happened to Joseph? I don't know. A minute ago, he was right behind me. We gotta find him. Dude, cover me. I'm going out. We're gonna have to retreat or we'll lose the whole unit. We'll have to regroup and move in another direction. If you keep moving north, we can make it to the main road. Well, if the bridge is still intact, we can make it back to camp before tomorrow. All right, let's move out. General, aren't you coming? You men go ahead. I'm gonna stay behind and make sure the area's cleared. But General, there's no time. You gotta get out of here. I told you to move out. That's an order, soldier. How many individuals are left out there? They're right in the line of fire. I gotta get them out of there.
The last thing I remember was the explosion.
don't know. You got here before we did. What happened?
I don't know. We were pulling out. I let my man go ahead of me. Someone must have dragged me to safety.
You're wounded. I gotta get you some help. You need medical attention. Medic! I need a medic over here!
I awoke again to find myself in the medical tent. I kept slipping in and out of consciousness.
2 cc's morphine. Check his IV.
He's severely burned over 60% of his body.
Should I change the bandages?
Well, give him another couple of hours. I'm afraid, though, there's lots of complications. We are going to have to remove his leg.
The next day, I asked for the army chaplain to visit me. He said he would pray for me. That night, I slept more peacefully than I had since the start of the war. When I awoke, the bandages on my arm had been removed, and the wounds had suddenly healed.
Is there any pain?
No. It's like it was never burned.
I'm puzzled.
The next night, I felt a presence in the room. But when I opened my eyes, no one was there. Just like my arm, my leg seemed to heal overnight. The doctor was baffled by this mystery. Then on the third night, I finally saw her. It was then that I realized it was her that had carried me to safety and healed my wounds. I am forever a changed man.
The vastness of the desert here is overwhelming. It was in this region, on the edge of civilization, that something profound may have happened over 2,000 years ago. After resting at Wadi Natruan, the Holy Family traveled south. In due time, they reached Mostarat. The Virgin Mary Church was built to commemorate their stay and the miracle they performed. It was here that Joseph, Mary, and their young son found comfort in the shelter of this cave. The Holy Family had such an impact on the people of the town that its ancient name of Al-Mahama, or the bathing place, is a tribute to the fact that Mary bathed her child in the nearby waters. The Holy Family experienced such welcoming hospitality during their stay in Mosterod that they revisited it on their return to Palestine. It is told that Jesus was playing with a stick. Joseph took that same stick and plunged it into the ground, causing a spring to gush forth. This spring flows to this very day. The church provides a sanctuary for all that enter. People from near and far find comfort in the walls of this grotto. Many place prayer notes in hopes that the spiritual strength of the Holy Family will guide them through troubled times.